Yeah. When we are live, let me know. Welcome everybody to Faith Exchange Church in Lower Manhattan. We are very, very pleased and honored to be able to serve once again for the Jewish Christian Roundtable that is really, really led up and headed up by Dr. Paul DeVries. Let's give Dr. Paul DeVries a really big hand. And by Rabbi Potasnik, which is really wonderful. We have a wonderful guest speaker with us today, and we'll allow Dr. Paul to introduce him in a little bit. But stay with us, tune in, share this with your friends, because we're going to have a great topic today. Often we come here, we talk a lot about anti-Semitism and what's going on in New York City and beyond, and how the Christian community can support that. But this time we're going to go a little different direction. Really led by Rabbi Potasnik, said, let's go a different direction this year. Let's talk about Christian persecution, and let's talk about that this time. So we have a wonderful speaker. I'm going to let Dr. Paul introduce him at that time. I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Paul. Use this microphone. How's that for short and sweet for a preacher? You know, not too bad. Amen. Quick and to the point. Amen. You want me to pray at gatherings? No.
Well, we are honored to be in this
Pull it closer, Paul.
house of the Lord, and we're honored because the gift of hospitality is very strong in this house, and we're very happy to be recipients of that gift. We are, when we need someplace to be, Dan is always eager to help. So it's an amazing man, and the Lord is with us whenever we here. Ricky and I have come to the church occasionally, and there's the presence of the Lord in this church as well. So I would love to have Dan come back to the microphone and say a prayer as we get started.
Happy to pray over this. Father, I release the anointing into this place in the name of Yeshua. I thank you that you're binding us so that we could become one mind, one spirit. We could become truly unified in our cause. Your cause, really, Yahweh. We just praise you for that. We praise you that you're knitting the hearts of Jewish people and Christian people, helping us to love one another even better, serve one another even better, get to know one another even better as we walk together, as we move this thing forward. I thank you for revealing yourself to me and your Jewishness. I thank you for that from many, many years ago, to have an appreciation for that. And I thank you, Lord, that relationships are being created here, being deepened here, and that those relationships will produce fruit going forward that creates true movement in our city. I want to just lift up right now what's going on in our city. I pray that the mayor that you would have us to have would be elected in New York City. I thank you, Lord. I know I have my own feelings about it. Who I want, who I don't want, and more of it is who I don't want, Lord. You know my heart on this. But we thank you that your will be done. Your will be done in our city. And we give you glory, honor, and praise for it. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Now, we were prepared to have our own Bill Devlin to speak because he has been amazing ambassador for God in many places, including Gaza. Many times he's gone to Gaza, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, to bring encouragement to the few Christians there. He arranged for me to meet in New York with Pastor Hannah that could not live in Gaza because of the threat to his life. And of course, things have had very rough time for Christians in Gaza and also in Nigeria and other places, because in Sudan as well. Bill has a knack to go to the most dangerous places, and maybe you know some of that, but he has been able to go into dangerous places and encourage the Christians and then come back to New York. What an idea. But he has a benefactor, or maybe a few of them, that pay the travel, and along the way he has have a lot of good advice along the way. Now, he now is in Jamaica, not for a missionary trip, but to bring a groom and bride together. And that was, I think, yesterday. But then he can come back to New York because of the hurricane. So he was a very smart guy. He asked this brother, who's a person that lived in Nigeria. He's a barrister, and his name is Emmanuel, a name that we all are spoke to. We want to be reminded that God is with us. So Emmanuel, and his last name is Ogebe. Correct me, I'm sure that's exactly right. But he knows Bill well, will tell us about his work in Nigeria, guided by Brother B, but at the same time, he will, Brother B will also help us understand the terrible persecutions against evangelical Christians in Nigeria, because maybe all the Christians in Nigeria are gospel-believing Christians, because you have to have the guts to be strengthened by God's grace and the gospel that gives freedom and purpose in life. So I turn over now to Barrister Emmanuel Ogebe.
Welcome, yeah. Woo!
Good afternoon, everyone. And just to be clear, I am not Dr. William Devlin. I know some of you are disappointed, and I know that Bill would like to identify as black, but that's not happening anytime soon. I do want to just mention something funny that happened earlier this year. He and I had gone to the Supreme Court of Nigeria to hear the verdict on a guy on death row that we were supporting. And after he was condemned to death, we went on TV and we were doing an interview. And Bill was mistakenly described as a lawyer instead of a pastor. And we joked about it and we said, you know, he'd become a lawyer like me by association. And we came back to the US, and the next week we were in Congress, and we went to try and bring up the case of this young man on death row. And Chris Smith, the chairman of the committee, introduced me and said, oh, Emmanuel is a pastor. And so in 1 week, both of us were misidentified. And I said to Bill, the more we walk together, the more we look alike. And so, yes, I'm not Bill, I'm Emmanuel. You know, we get confused a lot. Now, I want to just say how, glad I am to be here. New York was my first port of entry when I arrived on exile in America 28 years ago last month. And I am really pleased to have an uncle and a mentor, Professor Joe Omoke, who is here today as my guest. Could you wave to everyone? Let's appreciate him. He received me when I came here, and he put me in touch with a network of African believers. And I traveled around 20 states of the United States, and I didn't have to stay in a hotel, because everywhere I went, he found somebody to give me a roof over my head as I advocated. Thank you very much, sir, for that. I'm also happy to see Brother Jassy here with us today. Jassy traveled to Nigeria with me and Bill to commission a church that had been destroyed by Muslim Islamists, had lain fallow for 6 years. Sheep and goat were, using it as their home. And when Bill came, he said, I'm going to turn this from a house of sheep and goats to the house of the sheep of the Lord. And in 6 months, we were able to rebuild the church and dedicate it on Easter Sunday, 2021. And Brother Jassy came all the way to me, to that remote village in Africa. Now, let me say this. This is interesting about that trip. We had, Bill was not the first white person to go to that village. He was probably the second white person that all the kids in that village had seen. But Jassy was the first African American they had seen. They had never seen an African American.
Oh my God.
They didn't even know it was possible that a black person could be American.
Wow.
And so he's well remembered in some villages in Africa right now. So I will be speaking to us briefly about the situation in Nigeria, but I want to quickly just highlight a few of my New York antecedents. When I arrived here on exile, I was treated by a program for victims of torture at Bellevue University.
Wow.
And that's how great this country is, that, coming on exile, there was a program that recognized my situation. And there was nothing like that for me when I came out of prison in Nigeria. Another thing that happened in New York was the Fried Frank Shriver, the law firm in New York, was the one that filed for my political asylum. And then finally, the last fun fact I want to share is my first advocacy victory in the US was at New York City Council. We advocated for the renaming of East 44th Street after a pro-democracy activist who was assassinated by the regime. And in fact, it was because I spoke out about her assassination that I was imprisoned and tortured in Nigeria as a young human rights lawyer. So that's my connection to New York. Today we're going to be talking about Nigeria, which is the deadliest place in the world to be a Christian.
Yes.
More Christians are killed in Nigeria than the rest of the world combined for 12 out of the last 13 years. That means between 51 and 90% of Christians killed every year are in Nigeria. Now, sadly, a lot of people do not know these facts. But today, I won't plan to bore you with statistics. I will try and humanize the people behind those numbers. And there's nothing more difficult than trying to preach to the choir. I think trying to preach to pastors and rabbis is more difficult than preaching to the choir. But I will share a few stories about people that we have met and hope that resonates with you. Was that me? No. Okay. Okay. And the first story I'd like to share is the story I call The Old Granny and Her Pastor's Son. And so there is a community in northeast Nigeria, and the chief of the air defense staff was from that community. So everyone kind of figured, we're safe from the terrorists. Our son is the head of the Air Force. And unfortunately, the day the terrorists were advancing towards that community, he sent a helicopter. They took the people from his compound and left one solitary guard and evacuated them. And so when, the Christians in the community saw him evacuating his family, they began to flee. And there was one particular old lady, a pastor's wife, who had arthritis, and she couldn't flee. Her husband fled. He was in his 80s. He fled. And her only solution was to move in with the Muslim neighbor. And so she was there for about 5 days after the city fell to Boko Haram terrorists. And on the 5th day, they came and knocked on their door. Now, let me mention what happened. In the 5 days before they came to her door, they went around all the homes of the Christians, and their Muslim neighbors were pointing out their homes. And when they got to the home, they said, "Oh, this is the home of a retired pastor." They used an RPG to blow up their home. They were not even there, but their very home was blasted away. Unfortunately, somebody leaked to the terrorists that the pastor's wife was hiding in a Muslim neighbor's home. And so they arrived there, and they said they were going to kill her. And she said, renounce Christ or we kill you. And she said, well, at this point, you've destroyed our home. You've probably killed my family members. What incentive do I have to convert to your religion? I would rather die a Christian and see them in heaven. And they were so astounded by her faith that they let her live.
Wow.
Now, ultimately, some time later, the military was able to recover that city, and she found out, amazingly, that her 80-year-old husband, who trekked for hours, survived, the trek. Had kids who fled, ran into a Boko Haram checkpoint, and they were killing people at the checkpoint. Her daughter was hysterical, screaming, and the terrorists told her to calm down, and they spared her. And this woman's faith was honored. Every single member of her family she met alive. And I praise God. Yeah, praise God. And I said to her pastor's son, who is my friend, who was telling me this, I said, why isn't this story on TV? Amen. Guess who he works for? He works for Christian Broadcasting Network. Amen. I said, why? He said, no one has ever asked me. And I want to point out to you the betrayal and the challenges that we face. So my reflection this afternoon is, what do you do when the genocide denial is happening while the genocide is happening? Because one would have expected that a pastor who works for CBN would be able to tell the story of the genocide that happened in his own village, and it would be around the world. Another question I asked him is, I don't understand why your organization is not doing relief in a lot of these communities. And he said, oh, well, I asked the Air Force chief, if we could go in and provide relief, and he said it wasn't safe. And so they're not even responding the way they could because it's not safe. But one thing about Bill and I is we don't take advice from the Air Force chief. We go in and we trust God to protect us. And to quickly wrap up that story, a few years later, the Air Force chief retired, and he was assassinated. And so it's a really sad story of how he didn't stand to protect his people, and ultimately he himself did not survive. That's just one example. Another one that I would quickly share is a lady and her Redeemer pastor. I call this the lady and her Redeemer pastor. And so a lady and her elderly mom were traveling to the city so she could get treatment. And they were stopped at a checkpoint run by Boko Haram. The Christians were separated from the Muslims. And then the men were separated from the women. On the spot, they executed the men, the Christian men. And the Christian women were taken as sex slaves. Her mom was elderly and sick, and so the terrorists kindly put her back in the taxi with the Muslims and the taxi and let them go. This sort of operation has been going on nonstop for 12 years in northern Nigeria. even if you say that you're a Muslim, they will make you recite the Shahada to be sure that you're a Muslim, and then they'll let you go. Now, this Christian woman was taken away. Her mom arrived, in the city at the car park. There were other relatives waiting for the traveler relatives. And it was the mom who had to tell them, oh, your son was killed. Your daughter was abducted with my daughter. She was the one who broke the news. Now, what happened is quite fascinating. This was a lower level kidnap cell allied to Boko Haram. And what they do is they resell the high-value captives to Boko Haram. So if there's a pastor or someone like that, but if you're small fry, they can resolve your fate. And so they said to her, give us someone that we can call and ransom you. Otherwise, we're going to hand you over to Boko Haram. And she said, my mom is ill. She's poor. My dad is late. I don't have anyone. And finally, she gave them the name of a pastor. And one day, he's on the pulpit preaching when he gets a phone call. And, of course, he ignores it. He's preaching, but it's persistent. And he stops his sermon when he sees that this is a dedicated church member. He takes the call, and they say, look, you have 3 days to come up with a ransom for this lady, or we're going to sell her to Boko Haram. And the pastor broke into her house, sold all of her furniture, they contributed. Their congregation was barely a dozen people, because in that city, Boko Haram had wiped out all the churches before, all the churches. And this pastor was one of the few people who was willing to go back and restart a church. So he had only a dozen members. They finally came up with a ransom, and they asked him to bring the ransom personally to come and collect her. His family told him, you are nuts. Pastors are high-value targets. You can't go there. If you go, you're never coming back. And he went, and he paid the ransom, and they gave her to him, and he brought her back safely. And so we met this young lady, and we were just really fascinated by the story of that shepherd who literally laid his life down to redeem her from that situation. And Pastor Bill and I were able to help him rebuild his church, which had been burnt by the terrorists. And I have to tell you, one of Bill's volunteers, when we were working on the project, he said, how about we use fire retardant paint to make it difficult for them to burn it the next time? I'll pay for the fire retardant paint. And we bought it and we put it, and the church hasn't been burnt in the last 3 years. So that's one innovative thing that came from here. Now, these are just, a couple of several stories I can share with you. Let me quickly mention the story of Nathan. Some years ago, I brought together a bunch of Nigerian American pastors, and I said, look, you really need to go home and see what is happening. Now, 90% of Nigerians you meet here are from the south of Nigeria. So it is very rare that you have seen a Christian from the north of Nigeria like me. And so even getting them involved and interested was very difficult. And so I managed to persuade them. We went to Nigeria, and I convinced church leaders in Nigeria to bring the victims from the north to Abuja to meet. And at that event, as the victims shared their stories, pastors broke down crying. And I don't mean just the pastors from Nigeria. The pastors in Abuja broke down crying because they didn't know how bad it was. A pastor who was there had just buried 7 members of his church. They were coming back from a youth meeting in church when they ran into Boko Haram, and Boko Haram killed all 7 of them on the spot, and he had to bury them. And so no pastor is trained for that in theological school. And this is what we're dealing with. But very quickly, I decided to have a one-on-one interview with one of the victims who came, called Nathan. And when we sat down, Nathan pulled out dentures from his pocket and put them in his mouth. And that startled me. I wasn't expecting to see that. Nathan had one nostril. And so I asked him what happened. He was shot 5 times. They came to their company, his company, and brought out all the men. And they identified them by religion. 1 out of 6 of them was a Muslim. And they proceeded to execute everyone. They got to the Muslim and they said, why do you hang out with these infidels? We've told you not to do that. And they shot the Muslim as well.
Oh.
And so Nathan was the only survivor. He took 2 shots to the face, 2 to the torso, and 1 to the leg. Now, so I said to him, Nathan, they did a good job of putting you back together. Why do you have just 1 nostril? And he said, well, I ran out of money, so they kicked me out of the hospital. And I said, how much do you need? I think what he needed was about $600. And I said, you've been breathing through 1 nostril for 2 years because you didn't have $600. So we put together the money and we were able to, get his 2nd nostril open. Now, here's the thing. From 2013 till this time, I have had to organize 4 surgeries for Nathan because he really shouldn't have survived that. Those were mortal injuries. We had 4 surgeries for him. He's had 2 strokes. He survived 2 strokes. He was a real fighter. And last month, we finally buried last month. He finally went home. But this is the reality of what we're dealing with. And sadly, we're told that there's no Christian genocide. 2 weeks ago, the government of Nigeria flew a Texas mayor to Nigeria to come and have a press conference to deny that there is Christian genocide. I traveled up to Texas and I met with him for 3 hours. It was Professor here who put me in touch with the mayor, and I told him, I said, you can't sell out Christians. And so he said, well, I will tell the truth. And he got there and he had a press conference and he said, there is Christian genocide. I've documented it for for 5 years. And he got on the plane. And after he got on the plane, the news reports started coming out. American mayor says there's no genocide in Nigeria. And so I immediately texted him on the plane, the headlines. And he was furious. By the time he got to Frankfurt, he uploaded the video of exactly what he said. And he retained me as his lawyer, and we began to contact several of the media and said, look, you publish falsehood. So for the last 2 weeks, we've been having that fight. But what was amazing was that his video went viral. 600,000 people watched the video of his press conference where he told the truth. He got more than 20,000 followers on Twitter because it was so shocking that someone who was brought to lie decided to tell the truth. And for the last 2 weeks in Nigeria, it's been headline news. And that's the power of one individual choosing not to accept corruption and bribery and to stand, for the truth. Now, while that was a positive thing that happened, that same week, we had 2 setbacks. A Catholic bishop, very prominent, well-respected bishop in Nigeria, who has come out to testify in the US about the persecution of Christians, gave an interview and said that the United States government should not designate Nigeria for religious persecution. That was a huge blow to us. It was a betrayal. And why do I say that? A couple of years ago, I traveled to Nigeria and I was scheduled to meet with one of his priests. And I reached out to him, and he didn't respond to my text. So I asked mutual friends, and they said, Reverend Father was just abducted a couple of days ago. And what had happened is, there's just so much, but what had happened was a young schoolgirl
had texted in her class study group. They were posting all of these Islamist messages, and they said, listen, folks, this is a class study group. Please stop texting about your prophet. And they hunted her down, and they burnt her alive on video. They did this on video. They recorded it and proudly posted it. Deborah Emmanuel was lynched on video, and no one has been prosecuted for that. Now, when this happened, there was a Christian girl and her Muslim brother who were traveling to that city. When they heard about it, they knew they couldn't go. So they stopped at the Reverend Father's vicarage and to stay until the riots had stopped. And that night, the different group, the people who lynched Deborah were students. They were college students, not terrorists. A different group of terrorists came and abducted the Reverend Father and this girl and her brother. And it's interesting what they said to them when they found out the brother was a Muslim. They said, if you had been abducted by our rival group, we would have let you go because you're Muslim. But why are you hanging out with your Muslim sister? So you're going with us. Or with your Christian sister, so you're going with us. This pastor, this priest, and they were all abducted and tortured for about a month. And the bishop paid a $60,000 ransom to set them free. And this same bishop gave an interview and said the U.S. shouldn't designate Nigeria for religious persecution. You can imagine the betrayal. And we investigated and we found out the president of Nigeria personally called him and asked him to fly to Washington and deny that there's Christian genocide going on. This is the extent of the intimidation. Maybe I should quickly fast forward to my own experience here in the U.S. One of the things I've done is to help bring victims of terror to safety in the U.S. And, the challenge is, do you cause the darkness or light a candle or do both, And so I brought, several of them here, put them in schools and all of that. The Nigerian government decided to fight me because it was embarrassing to them that someone was helping victims of terror that they were not helping. And in particular, the fact that they were Christian girls. And there was a gentleman who was very helpful, Howard Levine, brilliant fellow, and he became a host family to two of these girls. What had happened, you probably know the backstory. They went to a school and abducted 276 girls. 90% of them were Christians from the Church of the Brethren alone. And, so there were global campaigns, Bring Back Our Girls. Do you know that the Nigerian government, through its embassy, came to the United States, went and took these girls from the home of Howie Levine? I remember, when we were getting intelligence reports from their families and all of that, I told Howie, I said, hey, this is what's happening. Howie couldn't believe that a government would be that evil and desperate. And when they took the girls from his home, guess what happened, where they placed them? They placed them in an apartment in Bronx, New York. And they went from Howie's lovely home in McLean, Virginia, to Bronx, New York. Hey, no hate against Bronx, New York, but it's not the same as Virginia. And what happened is one of the girls attempted suicide because she realized that the government of Nigeria had fooled her. And she converted to Islam right here in New York. And I said, what is the probability that a girl who leaped out of a truck by terrorists, being driven away by terrorists who were going to Islamize her, would come to America and convert to Islam in New York? It was all of the government's influence. I will wrap up the story about Howie by saying two things. It was a very sad experience for Howie to see these girls taken from his home and all of that happened. And I felt so sad. I said, this will make it so difficult for people to help victims of terror the way, these girls betrayed Howie and went away. And 2 years ago, this month, we lost Howie. And I went for his funeral. And I was amazed to learn that Howie sold the home where he had hosted those kids and bought a larger home that is now a hostel for refugees. So rather than be poisoned or bitter about that experience, he decided to expand his vision and leave a legacy of helping even more people. I should probably, the second thing about that story is yesterday I saw a post by one of the girls that we brought, one of the Chibok girls that we brought to the US. She just got engaged yesterday. And I thought that was huge news because 11 years later, 80 of her classmates are still in the forest. Many of them now have children for the terrorists. And I'm glad that I brought her to a place of safety where she's able to find love on her own terms and start a life where she can make her own choices. I think I will share just 2 more stories, and then we will go to a time of questions and answers so that we have some interaction. Now, one of the biggest problems we have is that it's not just the Nigerian government that is fighting the truth of what's going on. The US government is as well. And this was very shocking for me to find out. Is fighting the truth about the genocide going on in Nigeria. And I'll give one illustration. In 2018, there was a massacre in my mom's state of Plateau, and that weekend, over 200 Christians were killed. And I went on the radio, and I was denouncing the atrocity in Washington, D.C., and when I got home, my dad said to me, I just got a call while you were out, and we lost 4 relatives in that attack. And so it was a man, his pregnant wife, his 4-year-old daughter, and his 6-year-old son. When he heard the attack, he decided to take his pregnant wife out to safety first. And so he was leading her out when he ran into them, and they killed him and her on the spot. And they got to their home. The kids were still in bed sleeping. They burnt them alive in their home. And so that was, how close it came to family. I didn't know them individually. I knew them after the fact. Now, here's what is interesting. The U.S. has said that these attacks by people who come in shouting Allah Akbar are not religious. The U.S. has said it's competition for resources. I don't understand how you will come into my home and burn me alive and it's a competition for resources. It sounds to me like a home invasion. So if an armed robber comes into your home to rob you, that's not competition for resources. And that's what the U.S. government has been saying. U.S. government has been saying that this is a result of climate change, that this is herders who are looking for grass for their cows, and that's why they're eating the farms of farmers. And so they've given all of these excuses. But with regard to that massacre in June 2018, the U.S. suddenly found a hero. There was a Muslim cleric who hid 300 Christians in his mosque. And when the attackers came, he convinced them not to kill the Christians. And so the State Department gave him an award. And I asked 2 questions. The first is, if it's not religious, how come a mullah saved 300 Christians? Why are you still saying it's not religious? And then secondly, if the mullah literally saw these people and reasoned with them, why haven't you asked him to give you their names, so that they can be prosecuted? But that shows you the absurdity of what we're dealing with. They want to find a narrative that suits their purpose and ignore the reality of our pain. Now, Bill and I met with the embassy to have a briefing with, their diplomat in charge of religious freedom and human rights. And incidentally, he was Jewish. And he told us about the lovely pilgrimage the ambassador made to go visit this mullah in his village. And I said to him, did she stop by to visit the Christians in the displaced people camps? I was like, oh no, she was busy. Again, you see the double standards, as it were. And I never forget this fellow said to us, can you imagine, the Christians are claiming that Iran is involved with what's going on in Nigeria. And I said to him, but yes, Iran is also involved. And I said, 10 years ago, your boss at the State Department lied in front of Congress that Iran wasn't involved. And I provided the evidence that Iran had sent 6 container loads of weapons to Nigeria. To wrap up this thought, Hamas is in Nigeria, Al-Qaeda is in Nigeria, Ansaru is in Nigeria, Al-Nusra is in Nigeria, ISIS, of course, merged with Boko Haram in 2016. There is literally, Al-Shabaab is in Nigeria. There is literally no global jihadi terrorist group that is not in Nigeria. They understand the significance of Africa's most populous nation on earth, 200 million people. And my research shows that the earliest ties to bin Laden that Nigeria has was found in the transcript of the first World Trade Center trial, bombing trial. In the transcript, bin Laden's secretary mentioned that he had been in Nigeria. And so, for some reason, while the Western world is ignoring what is happening in Nigeria, the Mideast has been paying a lot of attention and investing heavily in Nigeria. I say that there is a battle for the soul of Nigeria. China is battling for the soul of Nigeria. The Middle East is battling. The West is not battling as aggressively. I won't, go too much into that. But I will add, I think one last thing, which is another very disappointing thing that happened. I've talked about the U.S. policy towards Nigeria. Generally, we found that with the Democrats, they're more deceptive about the situation in Nigeria. Now, when the Republicans come in, they're more proactive about the situation in Nigeria. But the State Department holdovers, hold them down to the party line. But we usually make more traction under the Republican administration. Now, last week, after that amazing situation with Mayor Mike Arnold, we had that bishop sell us out. And then an even more shocking thing happened. The president of Nigeria went to Rome for a meeting. And the U.S. envoy for Africa met with him and then said, there is no genocide in Nigeria. Oh, more Muslims are being killed. Christians are not being killed. And we were shocked. Why would a U.S. official say something that crazy? Now, here's the backstory to that. The U.S. envoy to Africa is a Lebanese Nigerian. He lives in Lagos. The current president of Nigeria was his governor. He's a billionaire. And so he knows who can hurt his business interest. And so if President Tinubu says to you, hey, do me a solid, his loyalty is not to Trump. His loyalty is to Tinubu. But think about the irony that a Lebanese Christian who is coming from a country that was fractured alongst Muslim-Christian lines and fled to Nigeria for safety is selling out his Christian hosts who are facing the exact same thing that he was facing in his country. And so that was a big blow to us. So right now, we're hoping that we can overcome his influence to be able to get the U.S. government to designate Nigeria a country of particular concern. And so I think at this point I will stop and take a few questions, if there are any.
By the way, if we can get a pad of paper, we get everybody's email address and phone number before we miss that.
I'll take care of that.
Thank you.
I was going to say, certainly Pastor Bill has brought to our attention the situation there and you've focused us greatly on that to the point that I quickly Googled Nigeria and the situation there, and different than I thought. I didn't realize the size of Nigeria.
Yeah.
That it's about 52% Muslim, about 48% Christian, according to Google.
Mm.
And that there are various things going on in the north and the central, and geopolitical things as well as religious things. If you could give us a little bit more of the context in which this is going on, because you have said two things. One is the Islamic Christian situation, yet there's the Chinese natural resource or locational situation going on, the geopolitical situation. And so I'm not quite grasping a couple of pieces. One, what is the Christian community doing on its own? Because it's almost half of the population in terms of fighting back on this. You know, so somewhat of what we're seeing in other countries like Israel, where it's gotten attacked and it's fighting back. Is there any situation of that going on of the Christian community against the Islamic community? And the second question is, as one looks at the worldwide, as you describe it, situation that's centering on Nigeria, what can we bring to it? Because now understanding the size, I was thinking it was like 5 million people and there were 200 Christians or something like that, you know? It's not like that. What can we as a community here, being somewhat limited, do about a big country? It's half the size of America or more.
Yeah. Great. So,
Can I make a suggestion?
yeah.
Can we go around and get the
Okay.
questions and then
Yeah.
put them all together?
Okay.
Diana, you want to say something?
I have a,
1 second. All right. Let's get male, female, a little diversity in this room.
Go ahead. Grab the mic. Just come up to the mic. Tell us who you are.
Rabbi Diana Gerson. And I don't, oh, that is on. Okay, so firstly, the special envoy for Africa right now is Tiffany Trump's father-in-law,
Yep.
who is allegedly has some ties, I believe, to Hezbollah. So it speaks to what you're talking
Yeah.
about, so I'm really curious to know how the administration is dealing with all this, because they've given him an enormous amount of power, and he's mostly interested in mineral rights. So that's one piece. The second I have is, are you familiar with Reverend Washishi Youssef from WCC? And have you worked with him in his office, because he represents World Council of Churches Africa? I know he is Nigerian. His family has had members who have been abducted, kidnapped, and the third person would be Donna Bollinger from United Church of Christ. Her research has been actually with formerly kidnapped children, who's been actually doing this work, and just curious if you've had any connection at all.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
yes. My name is Bishop Dr. Allen Cahan Sr. First of all, I want to thank you for such enlightenment, okay? Just have 3 things real quick, and one of them was already mentioned. One, how do we get more information about what's going on in Nigeria? So I knew what was going on in Sudan. I didn't realize what was going on in Nigeria. And maybe it's my fault, because I don't read as much about other things like that, but I just didn't know. The second question, the same thing he asked was, how can we support the Christians in Nigeria on a collective basis? He mentioned that. Third question I have is, what particular steps are you looking for this government to do to prevent any continued genociding, if I can use that word?
Okay.
One more question, Pastor? You take the mic.
I want to ask Emmanuel if you can help, because the Christians in the South, where I come from, in fact, I brought a picture for you today, the same guy I linked Mike to help us in the killing in the North when I was in Texas with him. He's kidnapped yesterday.
Oh my God.
Yesterday, I brought the picture here for you, him and the wife. They were kidnapped yesterday and they've been calling, and I can't do anything from here because I'm in danger, you're in danger. What happened was that the Christians in the South, and I want to ask how we can take it to the next level. I don't have the answer. Because with, because he usually carried the prayer shawl of Israel on his neck. Now, some guy saw him in the YouTube, and they went for him yesterday morning, and they took him and his wife. And but the thing is that we can't defend ourselves because the Christians who are being killed, that's what I wanted to address also. I happened to be 16, 17 when I joined the Biafran army. The killing goes back. We can't carry arms. We can't defend ourselves. If any Christian is caught with any arm, he's finished. I served in the Biafran army as an officer, very young. And we can organize ourselves. We are just like waiting to be slaughtered.
Yeah.
This guy is from the East. He's the same guy in Kaduna State. He's the same guy that's helping to point out what is going on to Mike and others will be sending up there because I can't go, you know. And most of us are exposed so highly. And as a bishop, I don't know what to do. And that's why I'm asking, how do we get the American government to help us? So that we can, because we can't own arms. Turkey is sending arms, not only Iran.
Yeah.
Turkey.
Yep.
I can give you all that, because I'm on the air. I don't know. I can sell it over here.
Yeah,
But I can talk with, I'm very glad. I've been listening to you since when I was at Columbia University. I've been hearing you every Sunday morning. Rabbi Potaski, I listen to you and I tape you every day. And I've been praying to meet you,
Yeah.
to let you see what we're going through, because I'm from the South.
Yeah.
I admire your impeccable judgment.
My brother with this reverend is still in the morgue. We couldn't pick his body yet to go bury him. My own brother.
Yeah.
And we're two boys. He's the oldest. So I'm talking to you still in the morgue. We can't go to pick up his body because of we need help.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. What are we going to do? That's
Yeah.
what I'm asking you.
Thank you so much. Before Barrister Emmanuel speaks, I just want to say the following. Firstly, who would have thought that a hurricane could stop Bill Devlin from coming back to New York City? Because I don't know any crisis in the world that has ever had an impact in restraining Bill Devlin. Secondly, I've come to learn over the years that Jews, speaking out on behalf of Jews, has some impact, but with a small I. Christians speaking out on behalf of Christians, similar kind of impact. It's only when we build strong coalitions, when we speak out for each other, the voice is heightened. So I would say that I think it's important for non-Christians to be very engaged in this discussion. Because people, I remember I went to a program, Elie Wiesel's son Elisha conducted about the treatment of the Uyghurs in China. It was a heavily Jewish crowd, and it was very impactful. People were writing letters, people were making statements, and to think that Jews who have their own issues are speaking out on behalf of others resonates somewhat. So I would hope after today, when we ask, what can we do, it sends a message to those of us who are not Christian, we have more to do to stand with you. The other thing is, I don't understand, Rabbi Gerson raised it, I don't understand how a White House that has a pretty strong evangelical presence inside doesn't have a loud voice outside in talking about this problem. So something is missing, right, in this equation. There's a missing piece here. Maybe it's the minerals, I don't know what it is, but it certainly begs the question, why? And I would think letters to the officials in the White House. And look, Paula White, right, is a pastor who's close. Her office is right near the president, and she's a major, right, evangelical leader. I think she owes an explanation as to how can you close your eyes when Christians are being slaughtered and you're silent. That just doesn't make sense, and I think we have to do that. The last thing I want to say is, I was thinking of reciprocity. There are people who do things for one another because it's like a quid pro quo. I'll help you because you help me. Amen. I think, however, we've come beyond that with this group. We are there for each other because it's the right thing to do. It's not because it benefits us in any way. We don't receive anything for it. And I always think of that image of Pastor Paul DeVries carrying, was it a rocket? Remember, a deactivated rocket or missile by the right to the UN, saying, this is what's being used in attacks. And that's an image I'll always remember, that Christians standing with us when we're under attack. So we have a lot more to do. That's our homework. And I hope when we walk away from here, we have some serious questions to ask. And then some of you saw what the movie, The King's Speech, King George VI, remember his line? He was a stutterer, and he went for lessons on how to repair that problem, and his line was, I have a voice.
Amen.
So I think all of us have voices. Let's use them constructively.
I could pick up on one wonderful brother, the rabbi, using a name, a very important Hebrew word, amen. Because we together, a few years ago, we went to the Pakistani embassy twice. And because we were rabbis and evangelical leaders, they were pacifist. They wanted to listen to us because we were not just evangelical, not just rabbis, but we were standing together for religious freedom and godliness. So we went there twice at least, in Iraq embassy, and I think in the Egypt embassy once. So we've done that. We can do it again. So that's why I say amen.
Amen. Thank you very much for all those questions. I think the first question Mr. Teach asked was with regard to the fact that there's many Christians in Nigeria. What are they doing? What do we do? What's the influence of the Chinese? Very quickly, let me say one of the biggest problems we have is the church in southern Nigeria. The church in southern Nigeria is very detached from the reality of what is happening in the north. Most southerners have never been to the north. They don't know our experience. So we are a minority in the north. Even in the US, there are Nigerians who meet me who I'm the first person from the north that they're meeting. And some of them can't believe that I'm a Christian. I have a name called Emmanuel. They expect my name to be Mohammed. So sadly, when you meet a Nigerian from the south and you share with him what I just shared with you, he has no frame of reference for that. So they are my biggest problem in America. Now, my second biggest problem is the American church. So we have American televangelists who fly to Nigeria, have these massive camp meetings in Lagos, come back and show photos of millions of people gathered at this meeting to their congregation. And they have no clue what's happening in northern Nigeria. The honorariums you get are from big churches in Lagos, not from small churches in northern Nigeria. So they don't go there. And so it creates an illusory world that makes my advocacy very difficult. So that's part of the challenge. Now, let me just mention that the governments of Nigeria are very savvy politically. I told you about the man, the pastor and mayor. They flew business class to Nigeria for this thing. That's not the first time that has happened. During the military dictatorship many years ago, the dictator flew boatloads of American pastors to Nigeria, paid, all expenses paid, had dinner with them. Now, I met with these teams at their hotel, and I told them the truth of what was going on. Unfortunately, they had dinner with the head of state, and one of the pastors phoned me afterwards and said, Emmanuel, do not speak to XY member of my team again. At dinner tonight with the head of state, he said, Mr. President, you say everything is nice, but there's a young lawyer called Emmanuel who came and met us, and he said everything is not okay. I was arrested 3 weeks later. And so when I heard that they're starting the same tactics of flying in Americans to denounce the genocide, I had flashbacks to what happened to me. So I share all of that to say that we do have problems with the church in the South not being sensitive and responding to our situation. And we've had Southern preachers deny the genocide in the last few weeks. The bishop who who said the U.S. shouldn't sanction Nigeria is from the North. So he knows it. But when the president calls you and asks you to do a solid, it's very difficult to say no when you live under his roof. So this is why we need engagements like this with other voices who can amplify. I'll quickly touch what can be done. I have several ideas of what can be done. I mentioned how New York City Council renamed a street outside the Nigerian embassy, the Nigerian mission here, after an assassinated activist. So these are local actions that can happen. The Nigerian government fought that. They sent teams to come and oppose it. It's amazing what they will do for propaganda. But there are things that can be done. This weekend is the International Day of Prayer for the Persecuted. So if you can elevate Nigeria in all your faith communities and designate a moment of prayer about the Christian genocide in Nigeria on November 2nd, that would be highly effective. Of course, if you can write to your congressmen and senator, Senator Ted Cruz has a bill to designate Nigeria. So you can ask Schumer and others to support the bill. I know that you have Wall Street here where you bring in special people to ring the bells. I don't know if they have to be billionaires. Can we get a victim of terror, a survivor of terror, to come ring a bell? I think, what is that other thing you do is symbolic. Is it the towers that you light up? There are things that can be done in New York City that will shake the people back at home. Now, I gave an interview on TV in Nigeria last week, and the journalist said, aren't you a traitor for wanting to impose sanctions on your country for religious freedom? This was an actual question. And I said, no. I said, the government needs to do the right thing, address religious violence. And the problem is solved. So if we can put all of this pressure on them to get them to the table where they will address these concerns, that will be highly effective. Let me mention, of course, here something interesting that happened. There was a camp for the orphans of 9/11, which was your own famous introduction to terrorism. And they invited child victims of terror in Nigeria to come to the USY camp. And we took two Christian orphans and one Muslim to the US Embassy for visas. The US Embassy gave the Muslim girl a visa and denied the two Christian girls. And so we had to fight them. I literally flew to Lagos and yelled at the Consul General for 2 hours. I said, this is wrong. US has orphans of 9/11. They want to bond with orphans around the world. The US government is not paying for this. And you told this child you wouldn't give her a visa because she has no ties to Nigeria. In other words, you're re-victimizing her for the terrorists killing her parents. And so after 2 hours, they buckled and they allowed us to come. But I share that to show you the systematic and institutional obstructions we have from the State Department and the US government, even to little interventions by New York's orphans like this. Quickly on the Chinese, my father-in-law has a school in northeast Nigeria. He was a professor here for over 40 years, went back and set that up. And he was paying for it, funding it with his Social Security. He died a few months ago, so we went back to try and keep the school going. When we got there, we were told that the Chinese had come and measured the campus because they're trying to take it over. This is a school on a mountain, the highest point in Nigeria, on the border with Cameroon. And the Chinese got to it before we could even finish burying him. So that's part of the challenge that we have. Rabbi Diane talked about the UCC and, Bulus's connection to Hezbollah. I'm not surprised. Gilbert Shagori, another story. We have a bunch, like I said, Hamas and Hezbollah are in Nigeria. They run, they actually have big malls that they run. And they have arms bunkers under these malls. You can Google this. They've been arrested, they've been charged to court, and they've been set free. So it's bizarre what is happening in Nigeria. But the UCC, I'm not in touch with the people you mentioned now, but they were very helpful to me when I came on exile to New York. I remember I was very cold, and it was the UCC that got me my first jacket to survive the New York winter. I would be happy to be reconnected with them. Now, Bishop, you said, where do we get information? A lot of this information is online, but it's not really in mainstream US news. I will say two things quickly. One of the amazing things that just happened was the New York Post did an editorial a week ago saying that the US government should act on the situation in Nigeria. New York Post. So I think that is a tool that should make it easy for you to attach that when you're writing to Schumer, when you're writing to your mayor, whoever you need to speak to, for us to illuminate the lights, on the tower, the Twin Towers, in honor of the victims of Christian genocide in Nigeria. I know there was a second point with regard to information. Look at Bill's website. He does mention some of our missions and some of what we do. A lot of what we do, we can't even discuss publicly. Now, you will see I have a T-shirt. I'm wearing the photo of Sunday Jackson. He was a Christian farmer. A Muslim herdsman attacked him on his farm, had his cows eat up his farm's crops. And when the Christian said, look, what the heck is going on? The Muslim stabbed him twice. And so Sunday Jackson took the knife back from him and stabbed the Muslim herdsman. Sunday Jackson has been sentenced to death. The Supreme Court confirmed his death sentence in March. He's awaiting execution. And Bill and I have been working to get him a clemency. Nigeria just pardoned 175 people. And of course, Sunday Jackson is not one of them, because it's a state case, not a federal case. But the state governor has refused to pardon this man, even though everyone in the country agrees it's a classic case of self-defense. There was no malice aforethought. He was attacked, and he used his attacker's knife to defend himself. But that's the absurdity we have in Nigeria. And I have said of that particular case, the federal government of Nigeria, or the government of Nigeria, is finishing off the attempted killing of that man that began 10 years ago. I mean, how sad is that? The state couldn't protect him. He protected himself successfully, and now the state wants to kill him. And Bill and I are, providing for his 2 kids. Let me just mention this. When we went to visit him in prison in 2021, I told him, hey, we just saw your kids. And he said, no, I have one kid. No one had told him that he had a daughter months after he was arrested. I was the one who told him he had, at that point, a 6-year-old. And we had to call from the prison to his uncle to find out her name and tell him. How is that okay? So his daughter, I saw his daughter in August. She's 10 years old now. He's never seen her. And if he's executed, he will never see her. And that's one of the cases that we can hopefully get a letter from you all, to the governor asking for a pardon. On that note, one quick tidbit I want to throw out. There was a Muslim man who, had a heated debate about theology, and he's been sentenced to death for blasphemy. And I know of a Jewish American who wrote to the Nigerian government and said, I would like to trade for this guy. He's a young kid. I'd like to trade my life for his. And Bill did the same thing. He made the same offer for this guy. So there are symbolic gestures that can be made like that will put the spot on them and hopefully cause them to respond. So you can support through Bill's organization. Bill he goes way off the beaten path. I joke that in our relationship, I'm the American and he's the African. Because he wants to go on dirt roads and bumpy roads. I have a headache, I'm complaining, and he's sleeping through it all. But he's a real trooper. Garci has gone with us on some of those really terrible roads. So I hope I've addressed your questions, but I think those are a few thoughts about practical things that can be done, and I'm open to more suggestions.
By the way, the bill you're looking for, I just looked it up, is 2747, Nigerian Religious Freedom Act of 2025.
Yes, that's it.
S.2747.
Yes, that's the bill. Yeah.
Can explain that again?
Oh, the name of the bill.
The name of the bill by Senator Cruz
Yes.
is S.2747.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nigeria Religious Freedom Act of 2025.
Did you want to
It was
come up to the mic?
introduced
Or we can
September
hear?
9th, 2025.
I just wanted to say one quick thing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming and for telling us all these things. I wanted to just bounce off something Rabbi Kathy said about having all the voices speak. And you know this line, but the first question asked by a person in the Bible history is Hashomer Achi Anochi. Am I responsible for my brother?
Yes.
And the answer is in the question. You take off that first letter and it says Shomer Achi Anochi. Yes, I am my brother's keeper.
Yes.
And I think that's exactly what it's just saying. We are here, we know that.
Yes.
The question is, what do we do?
Could you please speak into the mic?
I did.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. That's profound.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Use the mic, because otherwise they can't.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
I don't know if it'll make you help a little encouragement. I knew about this only from 2 rabbis that are online. I can't remember their names, but they brought it up repeatedly, and that's when I started looking it up myself. So that's why I knew about what had happened. So there are rabbis already out there starting to let people know. And actually, I thought I'm like, what? My complaint was to the Christians I know is the Jewish community is doing more than the Christian community about the persecution that's happening over in Nigeria, because nobody seems to know about it at all. So I just thought that was a bit of encouragement.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for going into such tremendous detail, moving and passionate. I'm coming into this kind of from an angle of ignorance, but you've enlightened me quite a bit. And
Definitely.
I'm just wondering from a geographical, geopolitical perspective, North and South reminds me of the North and South here, the Civil War, it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
But the South has 48% Christian and 52% of the Muslims are in the North, or how is that broken up? What's the percentage of Christians versus Muslim South and North?
Okay. So Nigeria is considered to be the one country in the world with an equal population of Muslims and Christians.
Okay.
Now, it used to be two colonies. A southern colony that was predominantly Christian,
Okay.
and a northern colony that was predominantly Muslim. Now, what happened was that the British colonialists allowed the Muslims to retain their feudalist theocratic structures and actually prohibited missionaries from getting into that part of the country. And then at some point, the Brits decided, listen, the northern Muslim territory isn't self-sufficient. We're having to spend a lot of money fixing it. The southern part is, prosperous. Let's combine the two. So it was a merger and acquisition. Let's combine efficiencies. And so they forced the two together. So they're really very different countries. And when they were leaving at independence, they tacitly foisted leadership of this new entity, by putting the North to dominate the South. So it's an artificial construct that is almost primed to implode. Nigeria has been described as God's experiment in the impossible. It's not a wonder that we had the Biafra War, which is, I think the worst genocide, post World War II that has happened, in which he was a child soldier, and over 1 million people were killed, and the weapon of choice that forced the conquest of Biafra was starvation. When you saw the bloated bodies and all of that's what happened. Now we have a situation where all of those elements are rearing up again. And, it's going to be even more vicious, more powerful. So I gave the illustration of this young man who's awaiting execution. The state is going to kill him. He happens to have the wrong religion, and he happens to have had the nerve to defend himself instead of accepting being killed by a Muslim. But then you have the terrorists who are going around and slaying people. Last week it was 12. This year, the data at this point is about 7,000 Christians have been killed this year already. So it's, genocide, it's incremental genocide. I'll wrap up with two things. One is that some years ago, the FBI here in New York called me and said, hey, an American has been abducted in Jos, can you help us? And so I called my contacts, and they said, yes, we're aware of the case. She was abducted. We're working to ransom her. She was a white American missionary married to a Nigerian pastor. And somebody had issued a bounty. He wanted a white person abducted. I think the bounty was $60,000 or so. And so these people went and abducted her. Now, she bonded with them. She spoke the local language and everything. And ultimately, they decided they would sell her back to her husband. So, we came up with the ransom and, sold her back. A few weeks later, I flew to Nigeria, and I met friends at the U.S. Embassy, and they were in a lockdown. So I said, oh, are you locked down because of the American woman who was abducted a few hours from here? And they were like, what American woman? A bounty was being offered for abductions of Americans or white people, and the U.S. Embassy did not even alert their own staff. They need to cover it up and make it look like it's a local conflict so that they have no responsibility to act. Anyway, why was the embassy locked down? Boko Haram had managed to plant a bomb in one of the residences of the U.S. Embassy in Abuja. And within a few days, everybody at the dinner that I was with on Sunday, by Wednesday, they had all been evacuated from Nigeria. Over 1,000 Americans and their families and their pets were evacuated from Nigeria because Boko Haram came this close to bombing an American home. I flew back to the States. I called my friend in the State Department and I said, I'm so sorry about this business with the evacuation. He said, what evacuation? I mean, I have to tell you, as someone who came on exile here, America was truly the city on the hill. But living in Washington has me so I can't believe some of the stuff I see. So to wrap up that thought, I'm telling you that even the US government is hiding information about attacks on Americans. So we can't even get them to act.
So listening to you, and the word that hasn't come up.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Listening to you, and this hasn't come up.
Yeah.
Would you describe this as, particularly as you talked about the way Britain brought the country together and it was two countries? Is this an ongoing insurgency, an ongoing war? Is this a civil war that's going on? What is taking place there? What does one call it in geopolitical terms?
Yeah.
Or is it strictly religious? What is going on?
Well, you know, clearly for me, it isn't a war. It is genocide. A war anticipates or contemplates that there are two co-equal entities in combat.
Correct.
So there's some element of fair, what we call in law a fair fight. This is not a fair fight. Now, on June the 14th, the Fulani headsmen arrived in a village in my community, in my state, and that night they killed over 200 people. I went online and I looked at the fatalities in the past 6 days between Israel and Iran, with Israel literally flying planes and bombing Tehran, and Tehran firing missiles at Israel. And in those 6 days, there were not up to 200 people killed in a global war, compared to the 200 people killed in my home state in that night. But guess which will get the headlines? The war, not the genocide. Now, some of the people who were killed that night were people who had been displaced by these terrorists years before and were sleeping in market stalls because they didn't have homes. And they were burnt alive in those stalls. So it's not a war, it's genocide. There's no other way to describe it. Now, in my state too, this has happened. A woman, they met a pregnant woman on her farm, and they killed her. They ripped open her abdomen. They brought out the baby, and they macheted the baby.
Wow.
And you know, when we were like, what on earth is this? And I remember somebody explaining to us, they want to terrify, they want to horrify. And they want anyone who comes to that scene to leave there traumatized. I don't know how else you describe genocide. Now, this is the Fulani headsmen. This is a group that invaded Nigeria in 1804. They're jihadists. How can you say it's not religious when they literally are jihadists? Now, this is separate from Boko Haram. Boko Haram are the famous ones, the ones who abducted the girls. And I have testified in Congress, and I said the Fulani headsmen are worse than Boko Haram. They are literally this brutal. They pillage, they destroy. They burn farms, they burn homes. They come to kill, to steal, to destroy. John 10:10, that's their agenda. Boko Haram will take captives, and they have rules of engagement. I mean, they're kind enough to let the old Christian woman go ride in a taxi. The Fulanis will not do that. So this is what we're dealing with. It's not a fair fight. You know.
Okay. I think this is...
Yeah, my thought is, these situations that Emmanuel is doing, but I think there's much more persecution of Christians in the world than we realize. In terms of nations of particular concern, about a dozen nations that have very vicious destruction against churches and Christians, and it's not always the whole country, but major sections of the country, including India and Pakistan and Syria and Sudan and Cuba, etc. I say 24. I can send everybody the publication about the freedom in the world. It's produced every year. So I sent it up to everybody about 3 weeks ago. I'll do it again because they could be a good prayer list and maybe action list to be more attentive and active how we can. So please assume I'll send it to you. I think I have everybody's email address except the brother here from Nigeria. So give me please your email address and let's follow through. So thank you, God bless you, and let's stand together.
All right, Joe, you can. Thank you.
Thank y'all. I have to run, y'all. Howard Security. Tasman. Tasman.
So I've stopped going to all these meetings because
Bless you, Amen.